Hey guys, welcome back to our market garden. My name is Moreno from thedutchfarmer.com, and in this video I'm going to show you the things that we do on our farm in March. So it's official, we are finally in springtime, and as you can see, a lot has changed since the February video. We've been seeding and planting a lot of crops and harvested out lots of the overwintered stuff. Most of the fruit trees are waking up and blooming, filling up the air with the sweet scent of their flowers. The bee and pollinator activity going on right now is incredible. Every year I'm surprised at the collective sound they make. It's like the whole local population of bees and insects gather around these trees to feed on the nectar of the flowers, brushing against the reproductive organs of the trees, fertilizing them, allowing us to have amazing fruit in summer. Hopefully we won't get any major frost damaging the majority of these delicate fruit blossoms. But those forces are not within our control, and we'll have to take and share whatever nature provides us with. What is in our control though is the annual vegetable production of the market garden, and with the seasons changing from winter to spring here in the northern hemisphere, so does a lot of the work that we have to do. As the temperature is slowly warming up, the organisms start to come back to life, and it's time for us to start seeding a large diversity of our crops. We still have quite the abundance of overwintered crops like this spinach. We planted these beds in September and they really start to take off at the moment. A perfect crop for when not many other things are available in the garden. Another crop we've tried to overwinter is this green onion here. We actually planted this one around the same time as the spinach, and to our surprise it not only survived the winter but actually was able to put down lots of roots and is growing really well at the moment. We grew this crop without any protection here in zone 7B, and we had a pretty mild winter, so I'm happy with what I'm seeing here. These overwintered carrots are another amazing crop we have ready for sale very early in the season. In fact, we are the first ones in this area to have locally grown organic carrots available during these times of the year. And this allows us to demand the top price for these crops. When the demand for a crop is high and the local availability and offer are low to non-existent, these are the moments that we as small farmers can make a large amount of our revenue. Whether you are the first with carrots or early tomatoes, being the first at market can allow you to gain an important share of it. Through consistency in quality, offer and customer service, you can keep this market share and you and your farm can proliferate. Here we are sitting in what has to become a perennial patch full of strawberries, asparagus, perennial herbs and rhubarb. Unfortunately, we haven't received the strawberries and asparagus yet. It was really something that I wanted to include in this video as well, since right now is the perfect moment to plant both these crops out. Unfortunately, due to consistent large rain events, they haven't been able to harvest the strawberry plants and the asparagus crowns from their lands. So we are still waiting on those, and maybe I will include it into the April video. Anyways, the whole idea here is to create a complete perennial patch of herbs and perennial vegetables. For now we have only planted the garlic on the outsides here, and in between each plant of the garlic we're going to plant a strawberry plant, and in the middle we'll have a full line of asparagus plant. Since these three plants all grow in a different manner, they are great to interplant and can work really well together. The garlic allows us to have a sellable crop in the first season, whilst the strawberry most likely will have a light yield this season and the large production will be next season. Asparagus will start to be harvestable in small quantities from season 2, and in the third season we'll be able to start harvesting much more from those plants. Here we are standing next to our newly created pea fence. March is a great time to get your early peas going. This crop can withstand temperatures as low as -6.5 degrees Celsius or 20 degrees Fahrenheit. Therefore, it is a great crop to get started early. In terms of profitability, honestly, this crop is on the lower end of the profitability list. Therefore, we decided to grow it here on one of the odd spaces that we have here available on our farm, and we strictly grow it for our own consumption. Due to the size of the land that we are working with, we have to be very thoughtful and selective with the crops that we are growing commercially. If you have more space available and your main sales outlets are CSA and farmers markets, it might be worth it to grow just to offer more diversity and interest to your customers. On urban scale sized lands is generally not a good crop to grow for commercial purposes. Again, this depends on location and your customers. The way we grow peas is fairly straightforward. We bought these wooden stakes or poles, put them at about 6.5 feet distance and attach a netting on them. And in no time you have your pea trellis. If you want a more durable type of trellis that could also potentially function for crops like tomatoes and cucumbers, you could use poles made out of steel, include one on the top to reinforce the whole structure and make it much more rigid. For the tomatoes and the cucumbers, we use the high tunnel, but when you're just starting out, this could be an alternative system. The way we grow peas is much like most of our other crops. We lay down a 2-inch layer of compost directly on the surface of the soil and plant directly into this layer. Each individual seed is planted at about 1/2 inch distance. Since we only plant small quantities for our private use, we seed this crop by hand. If you would like to go to a more professional level with this crop, you can definitely seed them using either an earthway seeder or a jang seeder. The great thing about peas is that they grow vertically, and as soon as you start growing crops vertically, you have the possibility for increased production. Since the peas take up space in terms of height, we can easily grow another crop at the base of them. Same goes for tomatoes and cucumbers and any other crops that grow on trellis systems or in a vertical manner. Because there's no competition for sunlight on the bottom of the crops when they're just getting started, we can easily include a succession of lettuces, arugula, carrots, beets, and a wide variety of other crops, allowing us to double our production from the same place in the same time frame. A great life example of stacking functions and production is the tree systems that we are working with on our farm. In our case, the Overstory tree systems are continuously photosynthesizing, taking atmospheric carbon out of the air and convert it into organic carbon, feeding the soil food web and increasing the health of the soil. As soon as the trees convert the inorganic carbon into sugars, proteins and carbohydrates, it attracts a wide variety of bacteria and fungi that feed on these elements, and in return it receives the essential nutrients it needs for its own healthy growth. This activity of bacteria and fungi in the soil creates air passageways, allowing water and oxygen to infiltrate into deeper soil levels, creating favorable aerobic conditions for the good guys in the soil system. As soon as these bacteria and fungi are being consumed by nematodes, protozoa and arthropods, they become nutrients that are readily available for plant intake. This means that the trees and the whole process of photosynthesis is creating favorable growing conditions for the crops and plants growing below them. Those are the crops that we are growing here on our farm. This process doesn't require any of our inputs, and in summer, besides having our own crops protected from the sun by the canopy of the tree systems, we have the pleasure and privilege of having additional fruit and nut crops on top of our annual production system. On top of that, since the tree systems are perennials, they are great in storing water for later use in times of drought and lack of moisture. The organic matter in the soil that comes from this whole process that starts with photosynthesis, with roots growing below ground, attracting the bacteria and fungi, can hold 10 times more water than soils lacking organic matter. Imagine what this does to your watering bill. Now, I have to say our watering bill is quite low and water is pretty cheap here, but what if you're in an area with low rainfall and water is a scarce resource? This will greatly help with the overall functioning of your farm. We can even go further into this and strategically plant hedgerows full of perennial vegetables, herbs and ground covers, low canopy tree systems producing climbing vines in the trees, mushroom inoculated wood chip pathways and a whole bunch of other strategies to continuously improve the soil health and quality of production that we offer to our customers and our families. I think that for the future, if we want to create resilient, diverse and healthy market garden systems where we are mainly working with annual vegetable production, we need to incorporate much more perennial plants and tree systems. I truly think that this is the only way that we'll be able to continue producing annual crops on this planet without entirely destroying it in the process. If we look at the diversity and amount of birds, insects and wildlife we have passing through our site on a daily basis, it's just incredible. Compared to most places around us here in the area where large fields are planted all with the same crop, it's just night and day. Same counts for most of the market gardens out there. Bare soil, annual crops and nothing else. They are not much different than the world's deserts, really. Anyways, I think that we covered pretty much everything that I wanted to cover for that, and let's go to the next thing. One thing we are always doing on a farm is experimenting. I'm a big fan of trying out new things, whether it is growing a new crop or variety, or whether it is interplanting unusual combinations of crops. Experimentation allows for creative thinking, and this is where things start to get interesting when we are working with nature. This year, one of the things that we're going to experiment with is growing ginger and turmeric in our high tunnel. Being a big fan and large consumer of these crops, we are going to dedicate a small area in the high tunnel specifically for these crops. Now, usually the way we like to work here on our farm is that we always grow towards the demand of our clients or potential clients. To know what that is, we always survey them before growing a specific crop. That's the whole foundation of the success of our farm, which I cover in the first step of this video. By growing towards a specific demand, we minimize the chances of failure through overproduction of crops or growing crops where there's no demand for. But in the case of ginger and turmeric, we know that the local demand for this crop is very minimal. We are in one of those areas where the demand for potatoes, cheese and meat is simply higher than the so-called rabbit food. We could probably find specialty restaurants in larger cities of France, but we'll have to ship it to them, which is not something that we are willing to do. Therefore, when experimenting with new things like this, it is best to start very small and create a market for it over time. The way to get both your ginger and turmeric going is by planting pieces of rhizomes. It is the actual end product that you use in the kitchen. We simply went to one of our organic grocery store customers and bought several kilos of fresh ginger and turmeric from them. When you buy fresh ginger from the store, you want to make sure that there is no signs of any mold on any of the parts. It should contain many eyes and is firm and not shriveled in any kind of way. Those are good signs of the freshness of the rhizomes. Usually when buying them in bulk like this, you will end up with several large pieces. These can be divided into multiple smaller pieces for you to plant out. Make sure that when you are dividing the main root into several pieces, each piece of the root contains what's called eyes. This is where the new shoots of the rhizomes grow out of. We cut ours to about a 2-inch size. After the cut has been made, we let the roots air dry for a couple of days before we plant them. After breaking or cutting pieces of roots, you basically create wounds that has to heal. If you plant it directly after the cutting has been made, you will have a high probability of that part of the root to get infected. We let the cut pieces sit for about 2 or 3 days. After this time period, we soak the pieces of roots in water for several hours. This allows them to soak up some of the water. This is especially important for roots that are a bit older and not as fresh. This soaking can speed up the germination process of the rhizome. After we have soaked them, we simply fill up a 2-inch deep tray with high quality potting mix, place the individual pieces of rhizomes in the trays and we cover them up again. Depending on the freshness of the rhizomes you are using, this germination process can take several weeks to several months. We've planted these roots on the 2nd of March and they've already started to sprout some 2 or 3 weeks later. It is important that when you plant crops like ginger and turmeric, you give them plenty of warmth to grow in. Since they are both tropical plants, we keep them at least at a temperature of 20 degrees Celsius. Since we are still heating the house during this time of the year, indoors is a great place to get them started. From here on out, as soon as the first leaves start to appear, we will gradually move them outdoors in this nursery space to continue growth. And as soon as all dangers of frost are gone, we plant them outdoors in the high tunnel. So far, this little experiment is going as expected, and it's interesting and nice to grow a new crop that we've never grown before. With the winter behind us, a lot of the work that we're currently doing is seeding nursery trays. We already started many trays since we started seeding in late February, and I've seen several questions from you guys asking on how we actually seed in trays. So let me show you. It is a pretty straightforward process. Depending on the type of crops you're going to grow, you have nursery trays with small holes for crops like lettuces, spinach, chard, all the way up to trays that are made specifically for crops that require extra root space like tomatoes, zucchinis, cucumbers, and so forth. On our farm, we utilize only one type of tray with each individual cell at 1.25 square inch or about 3 square centimeters. In these trays, we nearly start all of the crops that we grow in our farm, from kale to broccoli to lettuce to spring onions. Other crops like peppers, tomatoes, and cucumbers, we actually start in small pots or containers. You can start them in the same trays as the others, but after just a couple of weeks, you will have to transplant them into larger pots. We prefer to directly grow them in nursery containers, allowing them to have more root space early on and reducing the time spent potting up the small and tender seedlings. The process of seeding a nursery tray is pretty simple. Before we fill the trays, we make sure to water the growing medium to a point that it holds a bit of moisture. A quick check we like to do to see that there is enough water and not too much is a simple squeeze test. If we squeeze a bit of the potting mix, there should only be a couple of water drops coming out. If it is much more, there's too much water in it, and if there's nothing coming out, you can increase the moisture content. Once we have the right balance of water, we fill up the trays with the mix. At this point, it is important to equally distribute the potting mix, paying extra attention to the sides and corners. These places always need to be double checked when filling up the trays. Once we have filled the entire tray, we lift it off the working table and let it drop down again. This allows the growing medium to be slightly compacted. At this point, you will quickly see if there are any depressions and any individual plugs that need additional potting mix. Once that is done, with my fingers I create small depressions where I will plant the seeds. You could make a little dibble system to do this for you. We personally haven't gotten to it yet. Once all the depressions have been made, in the next step we seed each individual cell with the desired crop. We do this work manually and sow every individual cell by hand. You can potentially create a drop seeder or vacuum seeder to do this for you if you need to plant huge quantities at once. Honestly, on our scale we don't really need it and you become pretty efficient at doing this. Once the tray is seeded, we sprinkle a final layer of potting mix on top of the trays, gently and carefully brush off any excess, water it down and label it. On the labels we usually include the crop we grow, the variety, the date it has been sown and the location in the garden where it will have to be transplanted. We then give it a final watering and the germination process will start. Depending on the crops we are growing, this initial growth of the crops can take as little as 3 weeks before we transplant them into their final location, all the way down to 2 or 3 months. As you can see, it is pretty straightforward and there's not much to seeding individual trays. Inevitably, on a small farm, you will end up with large quantities of raw organic matter, whether it is damaged leaves from a lettuce crop, clippings from a tomato plant, or the tops of a carrot bunch. Whatever it is, this kind of organic matter will usually be thrown on the compost pile. Depending a bit on your context and climate, you could of course lay this organic material directly on your beds to let it decompose by the soil organisms and be converted into nutrients made available for the growing plants. This would be highly beneficial in the more arid and tropical regions of this planet. In a temperate climatic context, this would be perfect slug habitat, and therefore it is in my opinion better to first compost this organic matter in your compost pile. An even better approach, and to make good use of all of this organic waste, is to utilize your chickens to break down this organic matter for you and turn it into amazing fertilizer for the gardens and eggs for the kitchen. That's actually what we started to create here on the farm. As you can see here, I'm currently standing next to a big pile of organic matter that is located within our chicken run. This pile consists of several ingredients, from kitchen and garden waste to autumn leaves and branches to ashes from the wood stove and several other things. In fact, to be honest with you, every single piece of organic matter that comes from the farm, we throw it onto this pile. The way we constructed this compost pile system goes as follows. In the first section we place all the raw material. This is the place where the chickens will constantly get fresh new food offered. Due to the freshness of the organic matter in this first pile, they will be very active here and scratch their way through it. As soon as the organic matter starts to break down more, it will reach a point into which we'll move into the second section. The activity of the birds in the compost piles and the moving of the organic matter from section to section will allow for a healthy and aerobic composting process. This in turn will start to contain large amounts of beneficial bacteria and fungi. Once the chickens have had their fun and some time has passed by, we move the organic material to the final location to finish up the composting process before it can be returned to the soil. The idea behind this chicken composting system is pretty simple. Since we get large amounts of organic matter from the farm, we want to be able to utilize those nutrients to grow both eggs for our family, potentially making chicken feed completely obsolete, and to reintroduce the composted material on our gardens for a new cycle of crop production. This is a great way to go from waste to potential resources, to go from waste to eggs and nutrients for the garden. A question regarding compost I get often asked from people that are starting on a pretty low budget is, can you create all your compost needs yourself by collecting food waste from stores, restaurants and any other organic matter? And the easy answer is yes, you can make all of it yourself, but the question is, do you have the time and energy for it? Gathering the quantity of organic matter needed to create the required compost needs for the farm can take a long time. On top of that, it takes a lot of physical energy to move around that much organic matter. Just this pile behind me, which is roughly 5 cubic meters in volume, takes me about 2.5 to 3 hours to move, and I deem myself quite fit. Imagine what it would take you if you have to first gather all of this material and then move it around, create piles out of it, and turn over the piles on a regular basis. That's just madness. If you are already farming, it's even a different game. If you start putting a price on the hours and time of work you do to create the piles, which is definitely something that you should do, then you will very quickly see that it is much more economically viable to buy in high quality compost and have it delivered at your doorstep versus gathering the material yourself and making all of it yourself. At least that's the case here in our area. If we take the 3 hours of work I do to move it once, realizing that I'll have to probably do it another 4 times to create a finished product that we want, we come to a total of 12 hours of working on the compost. We pay ourselves a modest 15 euros per hour, which equals already to 180 euros for the labor. For those 12 hours of energy and 180 euros of investment in the compost, I can buy 9 cubic meters of high quality compost made by companies that specialize in compost production versus the 4 to 5 cubic meters of homemade compost. It's just a simple food for thought. If you have the time and energy to do it, so you can reduce your startup costs, then by all means go for it. If you already started your farm and you think that it would be cheaper to produce your own compost, I highly recommend you do a cost analysis comparison. You will probably be very surprised. Anyways, I'm glad that we survived the winter and we're off for another abundant growing season. If you have any recommendations of ideas or topics that you would like me to include in the following videos of this series, then by all means let me know in the comment section below. If you haven't subscribed yet to our channel, then now is the time to do so. And whilst you're at it, make sure to like this video as well. I thank you very much for watching and I will see you in the next one. Stay safe, stay healthy and have a nice spring.